Hi, I'm Mike Johnson. I've been involved in cross-cultural missions for 32 years. Well, I came to Christ at the University of Kansas during a training session for Christians. They were doing a skit on how not to share the 4 laws, and during the skit, I was reading through the 4 spiritual law booklet, and I trusted Christ while reading the booklet. In 1990, I went on a trip to Manila, Philippines. We were in for 7 days in Makati. I went to the number 4 newspaper in the country that had written in their editorials that the guerrillas from the mountains should come down and kill the Campus Crusade crew workers that were coming in that I was part of. And we went to their office to see if we could do a seminar with them. And they agreed, and we had 7 of their top leaders a few days later in a seminar. And I shared a presentation on success in business. And part of that was having a personal relationship with God. And the businessman that was with me shared his story. And of the 7 editors who were there, 5 of them indicated decisions to trust Christ. And so that was life-changing in itself. It was amazing to see that type of response. But on the trip out, we got to spend some time with 2 Americans who were in China at the time. And they had brought a brand new believer with them to be our tour guide of Beijing. And I happened to sit down with this tour guide who is a professor of philosophy at one of the universities. And we got on the Great Wall later that day, the Great Wall of China. And then we spent an hour or so where he just started peppering me with questions about his new faith in Christ. So when I came back to America after that experience, but I had a sense that God wanted me to try to maybe become a missionary to China. My wife and I explored that. We went to some basic training planning. We talked about a city for us to go to. And in the midst of all that, my team working with adults here in Kansas City had been challenged to pick a city in the former Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc. We ended up choosing Minsk, Belarus. I went over and did one trip where we went to different villages and shared the Jesus film. And then I had been raising funds to be able to go on another trip. And one of the guys that I was raising funds from was a business leader here, Jeff Laughlin. And he says, well, Mike, I don't think I'm going to support you. I think I want to go with you. And I said, well, yeah, that'd be great to go. And so he came with us on one of the trips. And the National Missionary was getting ready to send us to different locations. One place was to do evangelistic lectures at a graduate school. And so I sent Jeff and another businessman there to do evangelistic meetings there. I went with the team that went into the hospitals. We came back. Well, Jeff Laughlin, 2 weeks to the day after we got back, he calls me up and said, hi, Mike, I'm going to move my family to Belarus. I'm going to sell my part of the business and go. And so Jeff ended up going in September that year, and I changed our whole plan. We ended up arriving a few months later in January with our whole family in a hotel in Minsk where we all caught lice. So we actually lived in Belarus for 2.5 years. But Jeff and his family stayed for another number of years, in which time Jeff's visa was denied, and he ended up moving to Vilnius shortly and then to Ukraine, where he started working with Family Life Ministry and other ministries in Kiev. He was about ready to come back. Then the war broke out in 2014, where Russia invaded. And Jeff was asked to come back and help with the military ministry. And they started bringing over material to help with PTSD and to develop a chaplaincy program in the military. And through that time, up to the present, Jeff has been able to meet with generals, with other leadership within the Ukrainian army, and they've been able to develop a civilian type of chaplaincy program that has had a major impact on the Ukrainian army. So as to the question of what we should do in Ukraine today, there's really the crucial element is prayer and finding local missionaries to invest in. You have several different situations for the pastors and for the missionaries. Some are staying where they're at, but some, their cities have been bombed out. For some, one pastor in Mariupol on the coast, his 8-year-old daughter got killed in shelling just 2 weeks ago. They're having to move. They're having to find other parts of the country to go to. However, men who are between the age of 18 and 60 are not allowed to leave the country. So families are getting split up. Some families have been able to get out through refugee statuses, but most of them are wanting to stay. We have pictures of some of the guys we trained with little tables beside the highways with New Testaments, children's New Testaments, other Christian materials, talking to people. And they're finding since February 24th that people who were growing cold and wanting to talk about God are now very interested in wanting to do that. And they're seeing people come to know Christ, even in the middle of shelling, even in the middle of some of this. For us to do is to find specific people, specific situations that you can pray for, and there's websites that you can do that with, and also to find specific places to give for relief efforts and to help some of the missionaries that are staying in country. If we can help from the West during this season until they can get their country back, that's something we can do. You know, one of the things that's captured my heart from being an early believer is the whole concept, the whole teaching about the Great Commission. The idea that Jesus, both in the upper room, but also in Matthew 28, when he's talking to his disciples and getting ready to leave them, he's asking them to tell other people about what he taught them. And he's talking about the scope is the world. Am I trying to reach the world from Olathe, or am I simply focused on my problems here? I had a friend named Mabel in Little Rock, Arkansas. When I went to her home to have a prayer meeting for a missions conference, we walked into her home, and on her wall she had prayer cards from hundreds of missionaries. They were like 3 feet deep, and they went around the inside entryway of her apartment, went around all the cabinets of her room, and you could see that these cards were worn by her hands, being on the cards, praying for these people. Now, Mabel, the farthest she ever went from Little Rock was Arkadelphia. She had a heart for a world. She led prayer meetings for missionaries throughout the world. She had missionaries' cards that she was praying for every day. For the Christian who has a perspective of trying to reach the world from where he's at, from here in Olathe, whether you're working with kids, whether you're working with the youth, whether you're working simply on helping with finances. If your perspective is, I'm trying to reach the world with everything I do right here in Olathe, and if God sends me overseas, great. If I have the perspective that I'm trying to reach the world, that the Great Commission was so urgent to Jesus that he mentioned it in his closing remarks to his disciples before he left them, it's like we get all of a sudden a new wheelbase for living the Christian life. It changes the whole thing. When we hit a problem, like you hit a piece of gravel driving along a gravel road, it doesn't stop you. For me, that's why it's so important to have the perspective of how am I trying to help fulfill the Great Commission from where I'm at, whether I don't go more than 10 miles from the church.